A young, arrogant general mocked an old janitor for mopping the floors at Fort Bragg, calling him useless, washed up, and forgotten. But when the old man quietly revealed his forgotten call sign, Silent Wolf, the entire base froze. Within minutes, phones rang in the Pentagon, officers stood at attention, and the general realized he had just humiliated one of the most decorated covert operatives in American history. Subscribe to The Heart Listens, where every story speaks to your soul. Because some stories aren't heard by ears, but by the heart. Let's move to the story now. The morning air at Fort Bragg carried a kind of chill that only soldiers knew. Clean, sharp, almost too honest. It cut through the lungs, reminding you that you were alive, and that, for some, being alive was both a gift and a punishment. Down the long, polished hallway of the Special Operations Command building, the rhythmic squeak of rubber wheels echoed softly. A mop bucket rolled forward, pushed by an old man whose steps had long forgotten what it felt like to march. His name tag read J. Mitchell. No rank, no title, just a name, stitched over a faded custodial uniform that smelled faintly of bleach and solitude. James Mitchell, age 68. Once a soldier, now a janitor. He moved slowly, not out of laziness, but because his body demanded it. Every turn of the mop handle made his wrists throb. Every step tugged at the dull ache that had settled into his knees years ago. He stopped for a moment to rest his hands, watching the sheen of water catch the fluorescent light. The reflection stared back, thin, lined face, gray stubble, eyes that had seen too much and spoke too little. He wasn't bitter. Not anymore. Just tired. 3 years ago, when his wife, Evelyn, had passed, the house had gone quiet. Too quiet. The walls still carried her laugh, but only in memory. The bills didn't stop after she was gone. The pension barely covered his medication, and Social Security didn't care about service ribbons or scars. So, he'd taken the only job he could find that didn't require a degree or a clean back. Custodian, Fort Bragg. A cruel sort of poetry. Cleaning floors in the same building where, decades ago, he had once brief precedence. He moved his mop along the corridor, the bristles whispering across tile like a confession. Around him, the world pulsed with authority. Young officers in fresh uniforms passed, their voices clipped and efficient. Secretaries hurried between offices clutching folders, stamped classified. Every now and then, a salute cracked the silence like a whip. None of it was for him. He'd become part of the background, the man nobody looked at, whose presence was as unremarkable as the sound of the air conditioning. Mitchell didn't mind. Invisible men could think in peace. At 9:47 a.m., the double-oak doors at the far end of the hallway burst open. The echo hit like a gunshot. A voice followed, authoritative, sharp. Move that report to readiness status by 1400. I want no excuses. 3 men stepped through. 2 aides in pressed uniforms trailed behind a towering figure whose chest carried more ribbons than most museums. Lieutenant General Marcus Thorne, commanding officer, decorated, feared, and adored by exactly one person himself. Mitchell instinctively moved aside, pressing his mop bucket against the wall. His old training kicked in. Don't make eye contact. Don't speak unless spoken to. Stay invisible. Thorne's boots struck the tile in crisp rhythm. His phone pressed to his ear. No, listen to me. I said expedite. If I have to come down there myself, heads will roll. His voice filled the corridor. Then, just as he passed, the general stopped. His polished shoes squeaked slightly on the freshly mopped floor. He looked down, frowning, as if the ground itself had dared to offend him. You, he snapped. Mitchell froze. Sir, this floor, Thorne said, gesturing sharply. It's a hazard. Someone could slip. Mitchell's hand tightened on the mop handle. I put up the wet floor signs every 10 feet, sir. I don't care about your signs, old man. Thorne's tone dripped with irritation. I care about results. The 2 aides behind him exchanged uneasy glances. One, a younger major with ranger tabs, opened his mouth as if to speak, then thought better of it. Thorne's eyes scanned Mitchell up and down, the worn shoes, the trembling hands, the faded uniform that hung too loose on his thin frame. How old are you anyway? He asked, almost mockingly. Shouldn't you be retired? Mitchell swallowed. I am retired, sir. This is just. Let me guess. Thorne cut him off, smirking. Supply clerk? Motor pool. Motor pool, sir, Mitchell said quietly. Thorne laughed under his breath. And now you're here, mopping floors in a building full of people who actually matter. There was a soft hum in the hallway, the sound of humiliation, the kind that sticks to your skin like humidity. Mitchell didn't look up. He'd learned long ago that dignity sometimes meant silence. I served, sir, he said finally, like a lot of folks. I'm sure you did, Thorne replied. So did half the janitors in this country. Doesn't make them heroes. Mitchell's eyes stayed on the bucket. He didn't defend himself. He didn't argue. The mop water rippled softly from where his hand trembled. Thorne took a step closer, lowering his voice. You know what? I'm curious. Every real soldier I know has a story. What's yours? What did you do that was so important? Mitchell exhaled slowly. I did my job, sir. Thorne barked a laugh. Your job? You mean this? He gestured toward the mop. I'll tell you about jobs, old-timer. I've commanded battalions in Fallujah. I've briefed the Secretary of Defense personally. That's a job. Mopping floors is what people do when they've got nothing left to offer. One of the aides shifted uncomfortably. Sir, we're running late for the... Thorne raised a hand. I'm talking to him. Mitchell didn't move. He could feel the younger soldier's eyes on him. Half pity, half discomfort. He'd seen that look before, the one people gave when they watched an old dog being kicked. Thorne's words grew sharper. Tell me, did you even deploy? Or did you spend your career behind a desk counting boxes? Mitchell hesitated. I deployed, sir. Oh, where? Germany. Japan, Mitchell said softly. Thorne snorted. Germany. Japan. So you guarded gates. Maybe fueled trucks. I'm sure that was a vital contribution. Mitchell's lips pressed into a thin line. Something in his chest tightened. Not rage, not pride. Something deeper. A wound he thought had scarred long ago began to ache again. Thorne leaned in, his cologne expensive and suffocating. You know what I think? He said, voice low. You're one of those old men who tell war stories at the VFW, pretending you were somebody. It's pathetic, living off the valor of others. General, the major started again. Quiet, Thorne snapped. He was enjoying himself now. The power, the attention, the unspoken approval of those who didn't dare interrupt. Mitchell's knuckles went white around the mop handle. He could have walked away, should have walked away, but something about the arrogance, the utter certainty in Thorne's voice, held him there. Sir, he said evenly. I had a call sign. Thorne's brow lifted. Oh, this should be good. He smirked at his aides. Let's hear it then. What did they call you, janitor? Mitchell looked him in the eye for the first time. His voice was calm, almost quiet. Silent Wolf. The hallway went still. For a moment, Thorne just blinked, waiting for the punchline. But the younger major, the one with the Ranger tabs, stiffened. His color drained. His hand went unconsciously to his sidearm, not out of threat, but disbelief. What did you say? He whispered. Mitchell's gaze didn't waver. Silent Wolf. The major's voice trembled. That's not possible. Thorne frowned. Would someone please explain to me what the hell is going on? The major turned slowly toward his commanding officer, his voice barely audible. Sir, that call sign, Silent Wolf, is on the JSOC red list. If anyone ever uses it, we're required to notify the Pentagon immediately. The words hit the air like a detonation. Thorne's smirk faltered. He looked from the major to Mitchell, confusion hardening into disbelief. That's ridiculous. He's a janitor. The younger officer pulled out his phone, scrolling through a secured directory. His hands shook as he found what he was looking for. General, he said quietly. It's real. It's in the registry. Flagged red. Silent Wolf, classified operations, level cosmic. The corridor had filled now. Officers peered from doorways, drawn by the tension. The silence was suffocating. Mitchell said nothing. He stood there, mop in hand, watching realization crawl across Thorne's face like dawn breaking on a battlefield. The major looked up again, his voice hoarse. "Sir, how many missions?" Mitchell's reply was steady. "I stopped counting after Panama." The bucket water had gone still. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Down the hall, someone whispered, "No way." Then the radio on the major's chest crackled. "Major Reeves, report to command immediately. Priority Alpha." He didn't answer. His eyes were still locked on the old man standing before him, the janitor who wasn't supposed to exist. For the first time in years, James Mitchell, Silent Wolf, felt the weight of his name returning. And with it, the ghosts of 100 missions that never officially happened. He sighed softly and glanced at his hands. They were steady now. He hadn't wanted this. He'd only wanted to clean floors, to live quietly in the shadows. But shadows don't stay quiet forever. Not when truth walks through the door. And somewhere deep inside the Pentagon, alarms were already being raised. The morning light had shifted by the time James Mitchell entered the west wing of Fort Bragg. The corridors were colder there, both in temperature and temperament. A faint smell of floor wax and metal drifted through the air, blending with the echo of boots striking tile. Mitchell pushed his mop cart quietly, his steps slow but steady. He passed portraits of decorated officers, their medals gleaming under fluorescent light. Each frame seemed to remind him of another life, one that existed somewhere between war zones and forgotten promises. He paused beneath one photograph, an image of a younger General Marcus Thorne, in full combat gear, smiling for the camera. The caption below read, "Valor in Command, 2003. Mitchell looked at it for a long moment. His reflection shimmered faintly in the glass, aged, weary, half-erased. Then he lowered his eyes and kept moving. At the far end of the hall, laughter burst from the conference room. A group of young officers, full of ego and caffeine, leaned around a table scattered with documents and half-eaten donuts. Their voices carried the careless sharpness of people who believed the world still revolved around their ambitions. Mitchell hesitated by the doorway, waiting for a lull so he could enter quietly and mop without disturbing them. But before he could, a commanding voice cut through the chatter. "Hey, you missed a spot yesterday, old man," General Thorne called out, smirking as he leaned back in his chair. His tone wasn't cruel at first, just casually dismissive, the kind of mockery reserved for someone deemed too insignificant to retaliate. The laughter swelled. Mitchell nodded politely. "Yes, sir. I'll make sure it's clean today." But Thorne wasn't finished. He rarely was. "You've been working here, what, 10 years? Must have been quite the downgrade from whatever retirement home you crawled out of." The officers chuckled again. One of them murmured, "Man's older than the mop he's holding." Mitchell kept his head down, focusing on the floor. His hands were steady, but his eyes, those calm gray eyes, held a stillness that made the youngest lieutenant's laughter die mid-breath. Thorne noticed the silence, and something about it irked him. Power to him always needed to be reaffirmed. "Tell me something, Mitchell," the general said, rising from his chair. "Why'd you take a job like this? You ever serve? Or just clean up after real soldiers?" The room went quiet. Mitchell stopped mopping. He looked up, not in defiance, but in quiet consideration, like a man trying to decide whether a question deserved the truth or mercy. "I served, sir," he said simply. Thorne chuckled. "Sure you did. Vietnam, right? Everyone over 60 claims they did." A younger officer, Captain Reese, looked uncomfortable. "General, maybe." Thorne raised a hand to silence him. "Relax, Captain. I'm just making conversation." Mitchell gave a small nod and began wringing out the mop. "It's all right. I was there. Not officially. Some operations didn't have names back then." Something in his tone, gentle, factual, without a trace of bitterness, made Reese glance at him again. "What unit were you with?" the captain asked quietly. Mitchell hesitated. "Technically none. It was special clearance." Thorne rolled his eyes. "Oh, here we go. Every janitor with a story was special ops. Next you'll tell us you took out Bin Laden with a broom." The laughter returned, weaker this time. Mitchell smiled faintly, as though he'd heard that joke before. "No, sir. That wasn't my mission." Thorne crossed his arms. "Then what was your mission, old man?" Mitchell didn't answer. Instead, He slowly folded the damp cloth, placed it neatly over the bucket's handle, and straightened up to his full height. For the first time, his posture shifted, shoulders squared, back straight, eyes steady. It wasn't an act of defiance. It was instinct. Something in the air changed. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" Mitchell asked. The general smirked. "By all means. Amuse me." Mitchell nodded once. "You know, sir, there's a funny thing about silence. People think it means weakness. But in the field, silence is the most dangerous sound. It's what comes before a storm, or after a kill." The room stilled. He looked up at the general, and for a heartbeat, there was something cold, precise, and unmistakably military in his gaze. Not arrogance, awareness. "I was with Operation Rainfall," he said finally. Captain Reese's eyes widened. "Rainfall," he whispered. Thorne frowned. "That's classified beyond clearance." Mitchell nodded. "Yes, sir. It was." The officers exchanged uncertain glances. A few shifted in their seats. Even Thorne's face tightened slightly. Operation Rainfall was decommissioned in '89. Thorne said, now measured. "You couldn't have." "I didn't read about it, sir." Mitchell interrupted gently. "I was there. Northern Border Recon, Laos perimeter. 7 men entered. 2 came back." His words hung in the air like distant thunder. Thorne stared at him, jaw tight. "That's impossible. Those records were wiped. Only High Command had access." Mitchell lowered his eyes. "That's what they told us too, sir." Captain Reese swallowed hard. "What was your call sign?" he asked, voice barely audible. Mitchell hesitated. For the first time, his expression softened, as though he was remembering a name long buried beneath years of quiet anonymity. "Silent Wolf," he said quietly. It was a whisper, but it detonated through the room. Reese's hand froze midair. A lieutenant dropped his pen. Someone muttered, "No way." Even Thorne's expression faltered. "That's a myth," he said under his breath. Silent Wolf was a ghost operation, intel retrieval, cross-border extractions, unsanctioned missions. He was never confirmed. Mitchell looked up, calm and unshaken. "Sometimes ghosts mop floors, sir." A ripple of silence spread across the room, the kind that makes men suddenly aware of how loudly their hearts beat. Reese stepped forward slowly. "Sir, if he's telling the truth, we need to verify." Thorne snapped, "No. Enough of this. He's a janitor, not some legend." But even as he said it, his voice trembled slightly. Mitchell bent down, picked up the mop again, and said softly, "I didn't come here to be believed, just to keep the floor clean." He turned to leave, and that's when the door burst open. A young lieutenant rushed in, holding a tablet. "General Thorne, sir, we've just received a priority alert from command. There's a code verification request from Langley. Someone just triggered a dormant clearance code, designation, Silent Wolf." The room froze. The lieutenant looked up, confused by the silence. "Sir, the system's asking if the operative is active." Thorne's face went pale. "What the hell?" The officers turned toward Mitchell. He stood by the door, quietly holding the mop, eyes calm but unreadable. "I'd appreciate if you told them I'm retired," he said softly. "Respected." The lieutenant blinked. "Sir, he just verified the code before I came in." Every head turned toward him. The air was electric now, thick with disbelief and awe. Thorne tried to speak, but his voice cracked. You had clearance." Mitchell nodded once. "Had. I buried it with the men who didn't come home." He turned and started down the hall, his mop wheels squeaking faintly over the polished tile. No one moved. No one breathed. For the first time, silence filled the conference room. Not the kind that mocked, but the kind that demanded reverence. Reese exhaled shakily. "Sir, I think that man just walked out on history." Thorne didn't reply. His reflection in the polished floor looked smaller now, less certain. He sank into his chair, eyes fixed on the door that had just closed. In the distance, Mitchell's steps echoed, slow, steady, unbroken. He passed again under the framed photograph of Thorne, glinting under the fluorescent light. This time he didn't stop. Outside, the wind carried the faint scent of pine and old rain. The base was alive with motion, but in one quiet corner of Fort Bragg, An old man kept walking, carrying memories heavier than any metal could bear. Because some legends don't need to be remembered. They just need to be. The next morning, Fort Bragg was different. It didn't show on the outside. The flag still fluttered lazily against the gray Carolina sky, and the loudspeakers still called for morning drills, but under the surface, something had shifted. There was a hum of unease in the air, like the quiet tension before a storm. Every corridor seemed to whisper the same two words, Silent Wolf. No one knew exactly what had happened in the West Wing conference room the day before. The story had already mutated, told and retold in hushed tones over coffee, between training drills, and inside the mess hall. Some said an old janitor had bluffed a general and fooled the system. Others said he had triggered a clearance code buried so deep that even the Pentagon flinched. But most didn't say anything. They just watched him. James Mitchell walked the halls the same as he always did. Mop, bucket, faded green uniform jacket, no visible rank. But the silence that followed him now wasn't the silence of indifference. It was respect wrapped in disbelief. Every few steps, a soldier would pause, hesitate, then quietly nod at him. Some didn't even know why they did it. It just felt right. Mitchell never acknowledged it. He just kept walking, same steady pace, same quiet dignity. But inside, something stirred. After decades of being invisible, he was being seen again, and he wasn't sure how to feel about that. In the command office, General Marcus Thorne hadn't slept. He'd spent most of the night at his desk, rewatching the security footage from the conference room, trying to find proof that he hadn't humiliated himself in front of his entire unit. But the truth stared back at him in every frame. Mitchell had said only a handful of words, calm, factual, almost apologetic, and those words had shattered Thorne's composure like glass. On his desk, a cup of cold coffee trembled slightly as he tapped a pen against the edge. Rain tapped the window. Every few minutes, the phone would buzz with a new message from higher up, command verification requests, clearance level cross-checks, and one phrase that kept appearing in bold red font. Designation, Silent Wolf, reactivated, pending authorization. By 9 a.m., it wasn't just Fort Bragg that knew. Langley did. The Pentagon did. Even the Secretary of Defense had been notified. Thorne finally picked up the phone and called his adjutant. Captain Reese. My office. Now. Reese entered a few minutes later, eyes shadowed with exhaustion but alert. He looked like a man who'd seen enough classified chaos to last a lifetime. Sir, he said. Thorne gestured for him to sit. What are they saying? Reese hesitated. They're saying he's real, sir. Thorne froze. Reese continued, carefully choosing his words. Langley confirmed it. The clearance code he triggered was valid. The system cross-referenced biometric patterns and archived field data. His file was marked deceased in action, 1989. But the prints match. He's James Mitchell, alias Silent Wolf. The general stared at him, pale. You're telling me the janitor in my building is one of the highest classified operatives in U.S. history? Yes, sir. Thorne leaned back, the chair creaking under his weight. His mouth opened, but no words came out. For once, the general who could command 1,000 men couldn't command his own breath. Reese set a file on the desk. The manila folder looked old, the corners worn, the label faded, but the stamp across the front was unmistakable. Top secret / eyes only. Thorne hesitated before opening it. Inside were old photographs, grainy black and white prints from the Cold War era. In one, a young man crouched in the snow, rifle slung over his shoulder, face half covered by a scarf. In another, the same man stood beside a downed helicopter, surrounded by soldiers in foreign uniforms. No name, no timestamp. Just a code name typed in block letters, Silent Wolf. Thorne traced the image with a shaking finger. It was him. The same calm eyes. The same faint scar on the right cheek. The same man who'd mopped the hallway outside his office every morning for 10 years. Reese broke the silence. Sir, there's something else. The Secretary's office has requested a direct communication. They want to speak to Mr. Mitchell. Thorne's eyes flickered up. The Secretary of Defense? Yes, sir. Direct line. Thorne swallowed hard. And he doesn't know. Reese hesitated. He knows enough. but not why Silent Wolf is mopping floors at Fort Bragg. The general rose slowly from his chair. Get him. Now. Down in the maintenance bay, Mitchell was refilling his mop bucket when the door opened. Mr. Mitchell? He turned. It was Captain Reese, his expression a strange mix of awe and apology. There's someone who wants to speak with you, sir. Mitchell's brow furrowed. Sir? Yes, Reese said quietly. The Secretary of Defense. On secure line. Mitchell blinked, unsure whether to laugh or sigh. It's been a while since I've taken a call from that level. Reese gestured for him to follow. This way, sir. As they walked through the corridors, soldiers stepped aside, clearing a path. No one spoke. Some saluted instinctively, though technically he wore no rank. When they entered the communication room, the air was heavy. On the far wall, a large monitor displayed the Pentagon seal. The secure line was already active. A stern face appeared on the screen. Older, graying hair, sharp eyes that had seen too many wars and too few peaceful nights. James, the secretary said softly. Hello, Tom, Mitchell replied. His tone carried familiarity, not of friendship, but of shared ghosts. Thorne and Reese exchanged stunned glances. The secretary knew him personally. I thought you were gone, the secretary said. I tried to be, Mitchell replied. Guess the system didn't want to let me go. The secretary exhaled slowly. You were supposed to be buried under 10 layers of black ink. How in God's name did you end up cleaning floors at Bragg? Mitchell smiled faintly. Seemed quieter than most wars. There was a long pause on the line. Then the secretary said, You know what this means, right? The code activation triggered an internal alert. You've been flagged as active. The system doesn't understand retirement. Mitchell looked down. Neither did my body. Thorne stood motionless in the background, shame written across every line of his face. The secretary continued, voice low and respectful. You're a legend, James. Half the operations we run today were modeled after yours. You saved lives no one even knows were in danger. Why didn't you ever come back? Mitchell's voice softened. Because I'd already lost enough. Sometimes the only way to serve the country is to step out of its shadow. The secretary nodded slowly. Understood. But I owe you a debt. We all do. You shouldn't be pushing mops in a base named after men who did half of what you did. Mitchell shook his head gently. Don't owe me anything. I'm not here for medals or apologies. Just peace. A silence followed, a different kind this time. Respectful. Heavy. Then the secretary said quietly, You've got it. Silent Wolf. And James. Yes. Thank you. For everything the history books can't say. The screen flickered and went dark. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the monitor. Thorne stepped forward, his face pale. Mr. Mitchell. Ah. Mitchell turned toward him, eyes calm but unreadable. General, he said softly, you don't owe me an apology. Thorne swallowed. But I do. I disrespected you. Mocked you. And you. Didn't stop you. Mitchell finished for him. You were doing your job. Testing hierarchy. I don't blame you for forgetting what humility looks like. The uniform has a way of hiding it. Thorne lowered his gaze. Mitchell looked around the room, at the soldiers, the blinking lights, the silent witnesses to history. Then he placed his old mop handle back into the bucket and said, almost to himself, Funny thing about service, General. It's not about who salutes you. It's about who you'd still protect, even if they don't. He turned and walked out. The corridor lights reflected faintly off the polished floor, and for a fleeting second, Thorne saw his own reflection ripple beside Mitchell's, proud against humble, decorated against forgotten. But somehow, the reflection that looked more complete was the old man's. Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain again. Mitchell stepped into the open courtyard and tilted his head toward the cloudy sky. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to breathe, not like a soldier awaiting orders, but like a man who had finally stopped running from the ghosts of his own legend. In the distance, the morning drill began. Whistles, commands, boots striking pavement, and somewhere deep within the Pentagon's endless archives, a single file marked Silent Wolf quietly changed status, from deceased in action to honorably retired. But at Fort Bragg, among the young men who'd mocked him just yesterday, the story had already become something else entirely. They didn't call him Janitor anymore. They didn't even call him Sir. They called him what he had always been, a soldier who never stopped serving. The days that followed were quiet, but not the kind of quiet James Mitchell was used to. This silence was reverent, heavy, almost sacred. Wherever he went, soldiers stopped what they were doing. Conversations paused. A few even stood when he passed, as though compelled by something deeper than rank, something older than command. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew. The janitor who mopped the halls of Fort Bragg had once been the ghost who saved hundreds of lives in missions that didn't exist. The man who pushed a bucket now carried a history written in invisible ink. They called him Silent Wolf again, not in whispers of disbelief, but in tones of respect. On the third morning after the revelation, Mitchell walked into the mess hall as usual, wearing his gray maintenance uniform and carrying his mop. He moved with the same steady rhythm, but the room was different. Soldiers hushed. Heads turned. He could feel it. That ripple of energy that moves through a crowd before something significant happens. General Thorne was there, sitting at the long center table. His posture was stiff, his uniform immaculate. The moment Mitchell entered, the general stood. Every fork and spoon stopped midair. Thorne's voice was calm, low, but carried across the room. "Mr. Mitchell." Mitchell paused by the door, unsure how to respond. "Morning, General. Could you come here, please?" A murmur spread. The janitor and the general, face to face again. The last time that happened, humiliation had filled the air. This time, something else did. Humility. Mitchell approached slowly. The entire mess hall watched. Thorne straightened his cap then, without hesitation, raised his right hand and saluted. A gasp rippled through the room. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, one by one, the soldiers rose from their seats. Every man and woman in uniform stood and saluted the old janitor. The sound of chairs scraping against the floor became a wave of respect. Mitchell froze. He hadn't been saluted in 30 years. His throat tightened. Thorne held the salute a second longer, then said quietly, "Forgive me, sir. I forgot what real service looks like." Mitchell's lips parted, but no words came. His hands trembled faintly. Finally, he lowered his eyes, shook his head gently, and said, "No need for that, General. I'm just here to keep things clean." Thorne's reply came soft, almost broken. "You already have." The words hit harder than any metal could. Mitchell nodded, unable to speak, and turned to leave. But as he walked toward the door, something unexpected happened. A young private, barely 20, freckles across his face, stepped forward and said, "Sir, thank you." Then another voice joined, and another, until the entire hall echoed with quiet gratitude. "Thank you, Silent Wolf." Mitchell stopped at the doorway. For a moment, the weight of all those years pressed against his chest. The missions, the losses, the silence he carried like a second skin. He didn't turn around. He just said softly, "You're welcome, son," and walked out. Outside, the morning air was cold, crisp with the scent of pine and dew. The sky was overcast, the kind of gray that promised rain but held back, as if the world itself wanted to watch quietly. Mitchell made his way toward the small maintenance shed behind the barracks. He'd barely stepped inside when a voice called after him, "Mr. Mitchell." He turned. Captain Reese jogged up, holding a sealed envelope. "Sir, sorry, Mr. Mitchell. This just came from command. It's addressed to you personally." Mitchell frowned. "To me?" Reese nodded. "Hand-delivered. Pentagon seal." Mitchell took the envelope, the paper heavy and official. Inside was a single sheet of stationery, handwritten, not typed. He recognized the signature instantly. Thomas Beckett, Secretary of Defense. The letter read, "James, there are men who fight wars, and there are men who end them before they begin. You were the latter. I know you never wanted medals or ceremonies, but the country owes you a debt that words can't pay. If you ever decide to step back into the light, the door will always be open. TB." Mitchell folded the letter carefully, as though it were something fragile. He slipped it into his jacket pocket, exhaled, and looked out toward the parade ground. The soldiers were lining up for inspection. Flags fluttered in the wind. The sound of boots striking pavement rolled through the air like thunder. He stood there for a while, just watching. Not with nostalgia. With peace. That afternoon, General Thorne knocked on the maintenance shed door. Mitchell looked up from his mop bucket. "General." Thorne hesitated before speaking. "Mr. Mitchell, may I come in?" "Of course." The general stepped inside, looking out of place among the shelves of cleaning supplies. He wasn't wearing his cap. His face was drawn, humbled. "I spoke with Langley this morning," he said quietly. "They confirmed everything. Your service record, the missions, the recoveries. It's staggering." Mitchell didn't respond. Thorne continued. "I came to tell you something, sir. The base is planning a ceremony this Friday. Informal. Just a few units. We'd like to honor you." Mitchell shook his head immediately. "No ceremonies. Please." Thorne's expression softened. "I thought you might say that. But James, it's not for you. It's for them." Mitchell frowned. "For the young ones," Thorne explained. "They need to see what service really looks like. Not medals, not salutes, but humility. You taught them that without even trying." Mitchell looked down at the mop handle in his hands. "Humility's a heavy metal to wear, General. Harder to earn, too." Thorne smiled faintly. "That's exactly why they should see you." After a long silence, Mitchell sighed. "All right, but keep it small. No cameras. No speeches." "Understood." Thorne nodded once, saluted, and left. Friday arrived with overcast skies and the smell of rain clinging to the air. The base had gathered quietly on the parade ground. No news crews, no photographers, just soldiers, officers, and silence. At the center stood a simple wooden chair and a folded flag. Mitchell walked out slowly, his steps steady, wearing the same faded maintenance jacket. No medals, no ribbons, just the quiet weight of a man who'd lived through history and chose not to speak of it. General Thorne stepped forward. His voice carried through the air, low and deliberate. "Fort Bragg has seen many heroes. Most wear their honor on their chest. But some," he paused, glancing at Mitchell, "carry it in silence." He gestured toward him. "This man has walked among us for 10 years. We saw him every day and never once realized we were walking beside history. His name was classified, his deeds erased, but his service, his spirit, never stopped." He turned to Mitchell and saluted again. "Welcome home, Silent Wolf." The formation saluted as one. For a moment, the wind lifted the flag, unfurling it toward the gray sky. A ray of sunlight broke through the clouds, faint, fragile, but enough to paint a scene in gold. Mitchell blinked against it. He felt the warmth on his face, the first sunlight he'd allowed himself to feel in years. A murmur of emotion moved through the ranks. Some soldiers lowered their salutes to wipe their eyes. Mitchell finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "I didn't come here for gratitude," he said. "I came here because the floor needed cleaning. Turns out so did a few hearts." Laughter broke, gently through the tears. He smiled then, the first real smile in decades. "Keep serving, even when no one's watching, especially then." He turned, saluted the flag, and began walking back toward the maintenance wing. No fanfare, no applause, just the echo of hundreds of boots striking the ground, a rhythm of respect. That night, Fort Bragg glowed under soft rain. The lights reflected off puddles, and in one of those reflections, the faint silhouette of an old man could be seen. Mop in hand, posture straight, eyes peaceful. The whispers of Silent Wolf would live on, not in official reports or declassified files, but in the hearts of those who had watched him walk away that day. Some legends fade into history. Others simply keep sweeping its floors. And as the night deepened, a quiet truth lingered in the air. That dignity needs no witness, and real heroes never need to be found, because they never left. The morning mist hung over Fort Bragg like a soft shroud, gray and weightless. It was a week after the ceremony, and the base had fallen back into rhythm. Drills, orders, the sound of boots echoing against wet concrete. But something had changed, something unspoken. Every soldier now carried themselves with a quiet pride. The barracks were cleaner, The hall's calmer. And in the break room, where laughter once came at someone's expense, conversations were gentler. They called it the silent wolf effect. But the man behind it? He was nowhere to be seen. At 6 a.m., the maintenance wing was empty. The mop, the bucket, the uniform gone. Only a folded note sat on the wooden bench beside the locker. General Thorne found it first. He recognized the handwriting immediately, small, neat, disciplined. He unfolded the note with careful hands. General, thank you for giving me back something I thought I'd lost, purpose. But I've never been good with goodbyes. The truth is, I came here to disappear, not to be remembered. The mop was my weapon for peace. The floors I cleaned were my new battlefield. And in every reflection, I found fragments of the man I used to be. But the mission's done now. You've got good people here, General. Teach them to serve, not for medals, but for meaning. Tell them Silent Wolf went home. James. Thorne read the letter twice before setting it down. His jaw clenched. For the first time in a long career filled with command decisions and battle scars, he felt something deeply personal break inside. He looked around the maintenance shed. Everything was in perfect order, floors polished, tools aligned, shelves dusted. It felt less like someone had left, and more like someone had completed something. By noon, the word had spread. Soldiers whispered in corridors. Officers exchanged glances. Someone had seen him near the old gate, carrying nothing but a duffel bag. Private Jenkins, the young soldier who'd once mocked him, had tears in his eyes when he told the story. He stopped by the statue garden, just stood there for a while. Then he saluted and walked away. No one chased after him. No one tried to stop him. They all understood. Some men leave before the applause dies, because they never wanted it in the first place. Miles down a narrow road outside Fayetteville, a gray pickup truck moved slowly along the tree line. Inside, James Mitchell drove, with one hand on the wheel and one resting lightly on the folded letter from the Secretary of Defense. He wasn't heading anywhere in particular. Just away. The radio played an old country song, one of those soft ones that sound like memory itself. The words blurred into the hum of the engine. He stopped once, at a diner just off the highway. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, smiled at him as she poured coffee. "Cold morning," she said. Mitchell nodded. "It's a good kind of cold." She laughed. "Ain't no good kind of cold, mister." He smiled faintly. "Depends what you're warming up from." She paused, studying him. The worn hands, the calm eyes, the air of quiet dignity. "You military?" "Was," he said simply. She nodded in respect. "My brother, too. Afghanistan. Didn't talk much when he got back." Mitchell's gaze softened. Some wars don't end when the shooting stops. The woman exhaled. "Ain't that the truth?" When she brought the check, he'd already left, but there was a note on the napkin. "For your brother. Tell him someone still remembers." Under it, 2 $100 bills, folded neatly. That night, rain began to fall. Not heavy, just a slow, steady drizzle that blurred the streetlights into soft halos. Mitchell checked into a small roadside motel, the kind of place where no one asked questions and the silence had its own heartbeat. He placed the folded flag from Fort Bragg on the bed. For a long time, he just stared at it. The colors were faded, but the meaning was not. He sat down and whispered, "Mission complete." There was no one there to hear it, but maybe that was the point. He took out an old photograph from his duffel bag. It showed a much younger version of himself with a woman and a little boy, his wife and son, both long gone. He touched the edge of the photo gently. "Told you I'd make it home," he said. His voice cracked on the last word. Then he leaned back, closed his eyes, and listened to the rain. The next morning, a letter arrived at Fort Bragg headquarters, forwarded from a post office downstate. General Thorne opened it with trembling fingers. "General, don't look for me. I'm not lost, just walking a different road now. If any of the men ever ask about Silent Wolf, tell them he didn't disappear. He just became part of the silence that protects them. There's a time for war. There's a time for peace. And for some of us, peace just means finally being unseen again. James." Thorne read the letter aloud in the officers' mess that afternoon. No one spoke. Some looked down. Some closed their eyes. Finally, Captain Reese said softly, "He's not gone. He's everywhere in this place." Thorne nodded. "Yes, he is." Weeks passed. Fort Bragg moved on, but not without traces of him. Someone placed a mop and bucket near the flagpole, permanently sealed in glass. A plaque beneath it read, "To Silent Wolf, the man who taught us that quiet service is the loudest honor." Every morning, soldiers paused by it on their way to drills. Some saluted. Some just stood quietly, remembering. In time, a tradition began. On the first Friday of every month, the janitorial crew would line up before dawn and polish the floors of the base together. Not because they had to, but because that's what he did. No orders, no fanfare, just quiet hands doing honest work. It became known as Silent Wolf Friday. Far away, in a small lakeside town in North Carolina, an old man walked the docks at sunrise. He wore a flannel shirt, jeans, and a cap that said Mitchell's Bait and Coffee. He bought the shack a few weeks earlier and turned it into a tiny bait and breakfast, half fishing shop, half coffee bar. Locals came by for stories and peace. They didn't know who he was. Didn't need to. Sometimes, kids from the nearby base came by to fish. He'd help them tie their lines, show them how to wait patiently, how to listen to the water. Fishing's like life, he'd tell them. Quiet until it's not. They'd laugh, not realizing they were talking to a man whose quiet once changed history. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the lake gold, a black SUV pulled up. General Thorne stepped out, his uniform replaced by a simple jacket. Mitchell looked up from cleaning a coffee pot. "Took you long enough, General." Thorne smiled. "Didn't want to interrupt your retirement." "Retirement?" Mitchell chuckled. "This ain't retirement, son. This is reconnaissance. Checking if peace is real." Thorne nodded, emotion catching in his throat. "You were right, you know. About humility. About service." Mitchell glanced at him, then out at the lake. "You learn fast." Thorne hesitated. "The Pentagon sent another letter. They want to name a leadership program after you. The Silent Wolf Initiative. Focused on veterans who return to civilian life." Mitchell smiled faintly. "If it helps someone find peace, let them do it. But don't use my name for noise. Just let it whisper." Thorne nodded. "It'll whisper." They stood together in silence, watching the sunset burn down to embers. After a while, Mitchell said quietly, "You know what the best part of peace is, General?" Thorne shook his head. Mitchell smiled. "No one salutes you for it." As night fell, a breeze rolled across the lake, carrying with it the faint sound of flags snapping in the wind, far away. Back at Fort Bragg, the man once known as Silent Wolf watched the water ripple in gold and shadow, the world at last quiet enough to match his heart. He took a sip of coffee, looked at the stars breaking through the dusk, and whispered to himself, "Finally home." And for the first time in decades, James Mitchell didn't feel like a ghost. He felt human. The legend of Silent Wolf would live on, not as a classified file or military myth, but as a simple truth. That greatness doesn't always roar. Sometimes it sweeps the floor, disappears quietly, and leaves the world a little cleaner than it found it. When the story ends, the message begins. Subscribe for more tales that speak softly, yet deeply where the heart listens.